Joining me now is Isha Bandari, a deputy director at the ACLU, who are representing Mr. Khalil in the case. Ms. Bandari, Mr. Khalil is married to a U.S. citizen who is 8 months pregnant. As I mentioned, it is not clear what crime he committed. He's accused of fighting for Hamas or being a member of Hamas, a group defined as a terrorist organization in the U.S. All we know is that last year he played a central role in the protests at Columbia University against Israel's war in Gaza. Tell us about why you decided to take this case and what is your line of defense?
Thank you very much for having me. This case is, I think, going to be a seminal test of the government's power to override the protections of the First Amendment, because the arrest and detention and the targeting of Mr. Khalil are plainly unconstitutional because they are explicitly based on the speech and the advocacy he engaged in. This case is really important. I think it should be important for all Americans because it really is showing us what the limits are of executive action here. And as long as the First Amendment remains in the Constitution, it means everyone has the right to free speech.
It troubles me, as one who's been a civil rights activist all my life, to hold somebody with no specific charges for generally all we know is he protested. According to a government document that details Khalil's arrest, which was obtained by NBC News, the Department of Homeland Security cited a provision in the Immigration and Nationality Act which says someone can be deported if it's determined by the Secretary of State that they, quote, would have serious adverse foreign policy consequences for the United States, end of quote. And so listen to the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, earlier today about this case.
We don't need these people in our country. We never should have allowed them in the first place. If he had told us, I'm going over there, and I'm going over there to become the spokesperson and one of the leaders of a movement that's going to turn one of your allegedly elite colleges upside down, people can't even go to school, library buildings being vandalized, we never would have let him in. We never would have let him in to begin with. And now that he's doing it and he's here, he's going to leave, and so are others, and we're going to keep doing it.
Now, we're hearing in the past few weeks of many more cases of people being detained at airports and border crossings and mishandled by authorities. Just one example, last week, a 34-year-old German national with a valid U.S. green card was detained by immigration officers at Logan Airport in Massachusetts. He's lived in the U.S. since his teenage years and currently resides in New Hampshire. His family says that he was arrested, stripped naked, and subjected to violent interrogation before being transferred to a detention facility in Rhode Island. U.S. Customs and Border Protection told Newsweek that, quote, if statutes or visa terms are violated, travelers may be subject to detention and removal. An attorney for Khalil, appearing on MSNBC last night, called his detention a, quote, test case, as you just said, for other politically motivated deportations. So I assume you agree, since you've said much of the same a few minutes ago here.
I do agree. Mr. Khalil's case is going to be the first of many, according to the administration. He is not going to be the first person who's going to be targeted for immigration consequences for his protected speech. I think one really important thing to emphasize here is the government has been explicit that they're not saying he broke the law. They are being very explicit that the reason he is being detained and the reason they're seeking to revoke his green card is because of his advocacy, his expression, and his protest work. Now, people may agree or disagree with Mr. Khalil's viewpoints. They may even find them offensive, but the Constitution protects them. He's a lawful permanent resident here who is entitled to the full protections of the First Amendment. And if the government can do this to Mr. Khalil, they can do this to anyone else, and they can do it on any other issue, whether it's climate change, whether it's your views on the administration's trade war, whether it's your views on foreign policy involving Ukraine and Russia. The government can invoke that very same authority against any voice that opposes its policies.
And again, you don't, as you said, you don't have to agree, but it's, to me, as someone standing up for free speech and civil rights all my life, it's troubling. Do you fear there'll be more cases like this?
Certainly, we've already seen the administration target other students as well, including one other student specifically at Columbia University, who the administration said had her visa revoked explicitly for her views. And the administration has promised to do this. So we're not reading tea leaves here. We know that the administration has announced a policy specifically of using immigration law to retaliate against people in the country for their constitutionally protected protest activity, for their opinions, the views they express, the debates they participate in. And this is not going to be the last case. And I think what's especially troubling is it won't be restricted to this issue in particular. We've already seen the administration, for example, go after other organizations that it thinks disagree with its views, like Georgetown Law, for example, over its policies on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So it's not going to be just this issue. It's not going to be just non-citizens or immigrants. I think this administration—
It could be used across the board.
It could be used across the board, and I think this should trouble everyone. And I think this is a cross-party issue. We've seen people, regardless of their views on the conflict and regardless of their political party, express how troubled they are about this attack on First Amendment rights.
All right. Thank you for being with us, Asia Bandari of the ACLU.